Back in late September 2014, I was running a small logging crew near the Cascades, about 40 miles outside of Forks, Washington. We'd been clearing a new section of old-growth timber, working dawn to dusk, 5 days a week. The company wanted the land prepped before winter hit. One Monday morning, we arrived at the site and found our skidder completely torn apart. Hydraulic lines ripped out, metal panels bent backward, the cab door ripped clean off its hinges. At first, we thought vandals, maybe eco-activists, but then we checked the security camera we'd mounted on the foreman's trailer. What we saw on that footage, I still have it. Never turned it over to the company, never posted it online. I thought the hardest part would be explaining the damage. It wasn't. We were a crew of 6, me, the foreman, 2 fellers, a skidder operator, a loader operator, and a young guy we called Rookie, who did the grunt work, clearing brush, marking trees, running supplies. We'd been working this patch of forest for about 3 weeks, maybe 8 acres cleared so far. The company, Timber Ridge LLC, had the permits, said the environmental surveys were clean. Our job wasn't to ask questions. Our job was to drop trees, limb them, haul them out, and move on. The money was good, the work was hard but honest. None of us thought twice about it. The site sat at the end of a decommissioned logging road, about 2 miles in from the main Forest Service route. Thick canopy, Douglas fir, and western red cedar, some of the trees older than the state itself. The ground was soft with decades of moss and needle rot. It smelled like earth and sap and rain, even when the sky was clear. We'd set up a small staging area, a portable trailer for tools and paperwork, a generator, the machines parked in a row each night. No fence, no security, except that one camera I'd installed after we lost a chainsaw to theft the month before. The first week had gone smooth. We dropped about 30 trees, hauled out maybe half. The second week, things started feeling off. Small stuff at first. Tools moved from where we'd left them. A fuel can tipped over, though no one admitted to touching it. One morning, we found a pile of stones stacked near the tree line, almost like a cairn. Rookie joked that it was Blair Witch shit. We laughed it off. Then the dogs started acting up. A couple of the guys brought their hunting dogs to keep them exercised during the day. Those dogs were usually calm, lazy even, but that second week, they wouldn't go near the tree line. They'd whine, pace, tuck their tails. We figured it was a bear den nearby, maybe a cougar. Didn't think much of it beyond that. By the third week, the unease had spread to the crew. Nobody said it outright, but you could feel it. Conversations got quieter. Guys started packing up earlier, eager to get back to town before dark. One of the fellers, a guy named Raymond, who'd been logging for 20 years, mentioned he'd heard something the night before when he'd stayed late to finish a cut. He said it sounded like a scream, but deeper, almost like a human trying to imitate a horn. He said it came from the ridge above the site, maybe a quarter mile off. I asked if it could have been an elk. He said no, he knew what an elk sounded like. This wasn't that. I didn't put much stock in it, but I made a mental note. That Friday, we shut down early for the weekend. I did a final walk around the site, checked the machines, made sure the fuel caps were tight and the ignition keys were pulled. Everything looked fine. I locked the trailer, got in my truck, and headed home. The whole drive back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I told myself it was just the isolation, the way dense forests play tricks on your mind. I'd been doing this work for 15 years. I knew better than to let my imagination run wild. That weekend, I didn't think about the site at all. I watched football, fixed the deck railing, had a few beers. Sunday night, I got a call from the skidder operator, a guy named Cole. He sounded rattled, said he'd driven past the turnoff to the site on his way back from a camping trip and thought he saw a fire up there, maybe a glow through the trees. I told him it was probably just moonlight or a reflection. He said maybe, but it didn't sit right. I told him we'd check it first thing Monday. He said okay and hung up. I tried to go to bed, but I ended up staring at the ceiling for an hour, thinking about Raymond's scream, the stacked stones, the dogs. By the time I fell asleep, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Monday morning, we caravanned in around 6:30. The sun was just starting to break through the clouds, mist hanging low in the trees. I was first to the site. As soon as I rounded the bend and saw the staging area, my stomach dropped. The skidder was on its side, tipped over like a toy. The loader's boom was bent at an unnatural angle, twisted metal glinting in the early light. The foreman trailer had been shoved about 10 feet from where it had been, gouges in the dirt where it had been pushed. I stopped the truck, got out slowly, and just stared. The rest of the crew pulled up behind me. Nobody spoke at first. We just walked through the wreckage, trying to make sense of it. The skidder's hydraulic lines were ripped out, fluid pooled in the dirt. The cab door was gone, later found 30 yards away, hinges sheared clean. Rookie found claw marks on the loader's frame, 4 deep grooves, parallel, running about 2 feet long. Cole checked the fuel tanks, said they'd been punctured, fuel spilling out into the moss. I walked over to the trailer, saw the lock still intact, but the whole frame bent. Whatever did this hadn't bothered with the door. It had just pushed the entire structure. Raymond was the one who found the prints. He called us over, pointed to the soft ground near the tree line. Footprints, barefoot, huge. I crouched down, put my hand next to one for scale. My hand fit inside with room to spare. 16, maybe 17 inches long. 5 toes, a deep heel strike. The stride was at least 4 feet between prints. I looked up at Raymond. He looked back at me. Neither of us said what we were thinking. We didn't have to. I remembered the camera. I ran to the trailer, yanked open the bent door, and grabbed the small DVR unit I'd zip-tied to a shelf. The camera was still mounted outside, lens intact. I pulled the hard drive, brought it to my truck, and plugged it into a laptop I kept in the cab. The crew gathered around. I scrubbed through the footage. Most of it was just darkness, the faint outline of the machines, shadows shifting in the wind. Then at 2:47 a.m., movement. I stopped, rewound, played it at normal speed. We all leaned in. The figure came from the left side of the frame, emerging from the tree line. It was massive, upright, walking on 2 legs. The camera's night vision gave everything a grainy green glow, but the shape was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, long arms that swung as it moved, a head that sat forward on the neck. It walked directly to the skidder, stopped, and just stood there for a moment. Then it reached out, grabbed the cab door, and pulled. The metal screamed. The door came off. The figure tossed it aside like it weighed nothing. Then it moved to the hydraulic lines, gripped them with both hands, and tore them free. Fluid sprayed. The figure didn't flinch. It moved around the skidder, methodical, purposeful, ripping apart anything it could reach. Then it crouched low, got under the machine, and lifted. The skidder tilted, then toppled. The sound was like thunder. The figure stood, turned toward the camera, and for just a second, we saw its face. Flat, broad, eyes that caught the infrared and glowed white. Then it turned and walked back into the trees, disappearing as quickly as it had come. Nobody spoke. Cole rewound the footage, played it again. We watched it 3 more times. Finally, Rookie said what we were all thinking. "That's Bigfoot," Raymond nodded slowly. I just closed the laptop. My hands were shaking. I'd seen bears wreck campsites, seen cougars take down elk, seen plenty of wildlife do damage. But this wasn't that. This was something else, something that moved with intelligence, with intent, and it had destroyed $100,000 worth of equipment in under 10 minutes. I called the company, told the regional manager what happened, left out the footage. I said it looked like vandalism, maybe a disgruntled ex-employee or activists. He said he'd send an insurance adjuster and a security contractor. I said fine. He asked if we could keep working while they processed the claim. I looked at the crew. Nobody wanted to say no outright, but I could see it in their eyes. Fear. I told him we'd need a day to assess. He said, make it quick. We were already behind schedule. I hung up. Raymond pulled me aside. He said he wasn't coming back until we figured out what we were dealing with. I told him I understood. Cole said the same. By noon, the whole crew had packed up and headed home. I stayed behind, walked the site alone, trying to think. The footprints led back into the forest, toward the ridge. I followed them for about 100 yards, then stopped. The trees were thicker there, the canopy almost black. I heard a sound, low and distant. A rumble, almost like a growl. I turned around and got back in my truck. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the footage in my head, the way the figure moved, the casual strength it showed. I started researching online, typed Bigfoot Washington sightings into Google, and fell down a rabbit hole. Hundreds of reports going back decades. Footprints, vocalizations, structures made of broken branches. A lot of it was clearly nonsense, blurry photos, and obvious hoaxes. But some of it sounded exactly like what we'd experienced. The stacked stones, the dogs refusing to go near certain areas, the deep vocalizations. There was a pattern. I found a forum for people who claimed to have had encounters. I made an anonymous account, posted a vague description of what happened, didn't mention the footage. Within an hour, I had 20 replies. Most were supportive, saying it sounded like territorial behavior. One guy said Bigfoot sometimes targeted machinery because it associated the noise and destruction with humans encroaching on its habitat. Another said if we'd found prints, we should leave the area immediately, that it was a warning. A third said we should check for nests or dens nearby, that we might have gotten too close to where it was raising young. That last one stuck with me. I thought about the ridge, the thick trees, the way the figure had come from that direction. The next morning, I drove back to the site alone. Didn't tell the crew. I parked at the staging area and hiked toward the ridge, following the footprints. They were still visible in the soft ground, though some had been washed out by overnight rain. I climbed for maybe 20 minutes, moving slow, listening. The forest was quiet. No birds, no squirrels, just the sound of my boots on wet moss and my own breathing. I found it about a quarter-mile in. A shelter built into the hollow of a massive cedar that had to be 500 years old. The opening was low, maybe 4 feet high, but deep. Inside, I could see bent branches arranged almost like bedding, and near the entrance, fresh prints. Smaller ones, maybe 10 inches long. I crouched down, my heart pounding. Cubs. There were cubs. I backed away slowly, careful not to disturb anything. That's when I smelled it. Wet fur, earthy and thick, unmistakable. I turned and saw it standing about 30 feet away, partially hidden behind a tree. Watching me. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, massive and still. I froze. We stared at each other for what felt like an hour, but was probably 10 seconds. Then it stepped back, deeper into the shadows, and was gone. I ran, didn't look back, just ran down the ridge, stumbling over roots and rocks until I reached my truck. I sat in the cab, shaking, trying to catch my breath. I understood now. This wasn't random. This wasn't vandalism. This was a mother protecting her young, and we'd bulldozed right into her home. I called an emergency meeting with the crew at a diner in town, told them what I'd found. The shelter, the small prints, the encounter. Raymond believed me immediately. Cole looked skeptical but didn't argue. Rookie asked if we were seriously talking about Bigfoot like it was real. I pulled out my laptop, showed them the footage again, pointed out the way it moved, the intelligence in its actions. Asked them what else could do that. Nobody had an answer. The question was what to do next. The company wanted us back on site within the week. The insurance adjuster had already scheduled a visit. If we showed them the footage, it would go public. News crews, researchers, hunters, the forest would be swarmed. And if that happened, the mother and her cubs would either be killed or driven out. I thought about the way she'd stood there, watching me. She could have charged, could have torn me apart the same way she'd torn apart the skidder. But she didn't. She just watched, making sure I understood the message. I made a decision. I told the crew I was going to delete the footage, tell the company it was an equipment malfunction or a bear, and recommend we halt operations in that section. Raymond nodded. Cole asked what we'd tell people when they asked why. I said we'd say the ground was unstable, risk of landslides. It was plausible enough. Rookie said he'd back whatever I decided. I looked at each of them, made sure they understood. If we did this, we were all complicit. We were choosing to protect something that most people didn't even believe existed. They all agreed. That afternoon, I met with the insurance adjuster, showed him the wreckage, walked him through the site. He took photos, asked questions. I stuck to the story. Looked like a bear, maybe more than one, drawn by food smells or diesel. He seemed to buy it. Said he'd file the report, that the company would probably approve the claim. I asked about resuming work. He said they'd likely move us to a different section, that this site had bad luck written all over it. I said that sounded good. A week later, I got the call. The company was reassigning us to a site 15 miles south, lower elevation, already partially cleared. They were writing off the damaged equipment and selling the timber rights to this section to a smaller outfit that wouldn't start until next spring. I felt a wave of relief. It bought time. Maybe enough time for the cubs to grow, for the family to move deeper into the wilderness. I didn't tell the crew about deleting the footage. I just did it quietly, formatted the drive, smashed it with a hammer, and threw the pieces in a dumpster behind a gas station. The only copy left was in my mind. We started the new site in October. The work was easier, the trees smaller, the ground more forgiving. But I couldn't stop thinking about the old site, about the mother and her cubs. I drove past the turnoff sometimes on my way home just to see if anything had changed. The forest looked the same, quiet, undisturbed. I never saw footprints on the road, never heard vocalizations. I told myself that was a good sign. Rookie quit after a month, said logging wasn't for him, that he was going back to school. I didn't blame him. Raymond and Cole stayed on, but we didn't talk about what happened. It was an unspoken agreement. We'd moved on, or at least we were trying to. I started having dreams about the footage, about the figure walking toward the camera, turning to look directly at me. I'd wake up sweating, my heart racing. I thought about talking to someone, a therapist maybe. But what? Would I say? That I'd seen Bigfoot? That I'd destroyed evidence to protect it? I kept it to myself. In November, I got a call from a guy who said he was a wildlife researcher, asking if I'd heard about any unusual activity near the Cascades. He said he'd gotten a tip that a logging crew had reported damaged equipment and strange prints. I asked who gave him my number. He said it was public record, that he'd filed a FOIA request with the Forest Service. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, that we'd had a bear incident, but nothing unusual beyond that. He pressed, said he'd heard rumors of footage. I said rumors were just rumors, and hung up. I thought about calling the crew, warning them. But I figured if someone contacted them, they'd stick to the story. A few days later, Raymond texted me, said a guy had shown up at his house asking questions. Raymond told him to get lost. I replied with a thumbs up. That was the end of it. The researcher didn't call back. I assume he moved on to the next lead, the next story. There were always more stories. Bigfoot sightings were a dime a dozen in the Pacific Northwest. Ours was just one more unverified claim in a sea of them. By December, I'd almost convinced myself it was over. The new site was on schedule. The crew was working well. The company was happy. I'd started sleeping better, the dreams less frequent. Then one morning, I found something on my truck. I'd parked at the new site overnight, left it there while I rode home with Cole. When I came back the next day, there was a bundle of branches on the hood, woven together in a rough circle. I picked it up, turned it over. It was deliberate, carefully made. I looked around. The crew was already at work, chainsaws roaring. Nobody had noticed. I took the bundle and put it in the cab. That night I hung it in my garage. I didn't know what it meant, but I took it as a message. A thank you, maybe. Or a reminder. Winter hit hard that year. We shut down. Operations from mid-December to early February, standard for the season. I spent the time doing odd jobs, fixing equipment, staying busy. But I kept thinking about the old site, wondering if the snow had driven the family lower, if they were safe. One weekend in January, I drove up there. The road was barely passable, snow packed and icy. I parked at the turnoff and hiked in. The staging area was buried under 2 feet of snow. The wrecked machines were still there, rusting slowly under white drifts. It looked abandoned, forgotten. I stood there for a while, just listening. The forest was silent except for the wind. I hiked up toward the ridge, following the same path I'd taken months before. The snow was deep, and I sank to my knees with every step. It took me twice as long to reach the cedar with the shelter. When I got there, I stopped. The entrance was covered with branches and packed snow, sealed off. I didn't go closer, didn't want to disturb it, but I could see signs of use. Broken branches nearby, a faint trail leading farther up the ridge. They'd been here recently. Maybe they still were. I left a bag of apples at the base of the tree. It felt stupid, like leaving an offering at a shrine. But I didn't know what else to do. I wanted them to know I hadn't forgotten, that I was keeping my word. I hiked back down as the sun started to set, the temperature dropping fast. On the way to my truck, I heard it. A vocalization, low and long, echoing through the trees. It didn't sound aggressive. It sounded almost acknowledging. I stopped, listened until it faded, then kept walking. When I got home, I pulled out a notebook and started writing everything down. Not for publication, not for proof, just for me. I wrote about the crew, the wreckage, the footage, the shelter, the cubs. I wrote about the choice I'd made, the footage I'd destroyed, the silence I'd kept. I wrote about the mother, the way she'd watched me, the intelligence in her eyes. I wrote about the bundle of branches, the apples, the vocalization in the snow. I wrote until my hand cramped, until I'd gotten it all out. Then I closed the notebook and put it in a drawer. In February, we went back to work. The new site was almost done. Another month, maybe 2, and we'd move on to the next job. The company was already scouting locations. I made sure none of them were near the old site. I didn't have much pull, but I did what I could. I talked to the regional manager, suggested we focus on areas closer to existing roads, lower elevation, easier access. He agreed. It made logistical sense. I didn't tell him the real reason. By March, the schedule was set. We'd be working farther south, away from the Cascades, away from the ridge. I felt a weight lift. In April, I went back to the old site one last time. The snow had melted and the forest was waking up. New growth, green shoots pushing through the wet earth. The staging area was overgrown, the machine slowly being reclaimed by moss and vines. I hiked up to the ridge, to the cedar. The shelter was still there, but empty, no signs of recent use. They'd moved on. I felt relieved and sad at the same time. I'd never see them again. But that was the point. They were safe, hidden, free. I sat down on a fallen log near the tree and just listened to the forest. Birds were back, singing in the canopy. A squirrel chattered somewhere nearby. The wind moved through the branches, a soft, constant whisper. I thought about the footage, about what would have happened if I'd kept it. The fame, maybe, the attention, the satisfaction of proving something the world said didn't exist, but also the consequences. The hunters, the cameras, the crowds, the mother and cubs driven out or worse. I'd made the right choice. I knew that. As I stood to leave, I saw something at the base of the cedar. I walked over, crouched down. It was a stone, smooth and black, placed carefully on a flat piece of bark. Next to it, a small tuft of dark fur, almost like it had been left deliberately. I picked up the stone, turned it over in my hand. It was still faintly warm, like it had been held recently. I looked up toward the ridge, toward the deeper forest. I didn't see anything, but I felt it, the presence, the watching. I put the stone in my pocket, nodded once toward the trees, and walked back down. That night, I told my wife the whole story. I'd kept it from her for months, didn't want her to think I'd lost my mind, but I couldn't hold it anymore. I showed her the stone, the notebook, described the footage frame by frame. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me if I regretted deleting it. I said no. She asked if I believed what I saw. I said yes. She nodded, said she believed me. That was all I needed. A week later, I got a text from Raymond. He'd been hiking near Mount Rainier and found a structure, branches stacked in a teepee shape, too purposeful to be natural. He sent a photo. I recognized the pattern. I told him to leave it alone, not to go back. He said he wouldn't. That was the last time we talked about Bigfoot. The word had stopped feeling strange. It had stopped feeling like a myth. It was just a fact now. Something real. Something we'd encountered and chosen to protect. In May, the crew finished the job and moved south. I stayed on as foreman. The work was good. The company trusted me. But I kept the stone in my desk drawer, pulled it out sometimes when I needed to remember, needed to remind myself why I did what I did. Over the next year, I heard stories. Other crews reporting strange sounds, equipment moved overnight, tools gone missing. I never said anything, just listened, nodded, suggested they work different areas. Most of the time, they did. A few times, I drove out to sites after hours, left small offerings near the tree lines. Food, supplies, nothing that would draw attention. I didn't know if it helped. Didn't know if the family was even still in the area. But it felt right. In the fall of 2015, I got a call from a documentary filmmaker. He said he was making a film about Bigfoot encounters in the Pacific Northwest, that he'd heard I might have a story. I asked who told him that. He said a source he couldn't reveal. I told him I didn't have anything to share. He offered money. I hung up. He called back twice. I blocked the number. A month later, I saw the documentary on a streaming site. It featured a dozen people, all claiming encounters, most with no evidence. A few had photos, grainy and inconclusive. None had footage like what I'd destroyed. I watched the whole thing, felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. Guilt that I could have given them proof, relief that I hadn't. Cole left the crew that winter, took a job in construction, said he wanted to be closer to his kids, that the long drives were killing him. I understood. Raymond retired the following spring, said his back couldn't take it anymore. Rookie never came back. It was just me and a new crew now, guys who hadn't been there, who didn't know. I preferred it that way. The secret was lighter when fewer people carried it. I stopped going to the old site. There was no reason to. The company had sold the rights, and the new outfit had started clearing the lower sections. I heard they hadn't had any problems. Maybe the family had moved deeper into the mountains. Maybe they'd found a place where the chainsaws couldn't reach. I hoped so. One night, I had a dream. I was standing at the ridge, looking down at the cedar. The mother was there, the cubs beside her, taller now, almost adolescent. She looked at me, raised one hand, and then turned and walked into the trees. The cubs followed. When I woke up, I felt a sense of closure, like something had ended, quietly and without fanfare. I kept working, kept logging, but I was more careful now, listened to the forest more, paid attention to the signs. If I saw stacked stones, I moved the crew. If the dogs acted strange, I called it a day early. The company didn't question it, they trusted my judgment, and the crews stayed safe. No more wrecked machines, no more encounters, just honest work in a forest that felt a little less empty than it used to. I never saw Bigfoot again, but I carried the memory, the footage I'd destroyed, the choice I'd made. It shaped everything that came after, and I wouldn't change it. In the years since, I've thought a lot about what it means to see something the world doesn't believe in, to hold proof and choose to destroy it. People talk about Bigfoot like it's a mystery to be solved, a puzzle with a missing piece. But for me, it stopped being a mystery the moment I saw the cubs. It became a responsibility, a choice between curiosity and compassion, between fame and doing the right thing. I chose compassion. I'd make the same choice again. I still have the stone, still keep the notebook in the drawer. My wife knows where it is, knows the whole story. I've told my son too, now that he's older. He asked if I ever wished I'd kept the footage. I said no. He asked why. I told him some things are more important than being believed. Some things you protect because it's the right thing to do, even if no one ever knows. He nodded, like he understood. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Either way, I'd said what I needed to say. The forest is still there, the ridge, the cedar, the trails I walked. I drive past sometimes on my way to other sites, other jobs. I don't stop anymore, don't hike in. I just look, remember, and keep driving. The logging company moved its operations east a few years ago, farther into the Cascades. I stayed local, took a job with a smaller outfit that focuses on sustainable cuts, selective harvesting. It feels better, less like destruction, more like management. I think about the mother sometimes, wonder if she'd see the difference. Probably not. A chainsaw is a chainsaw. But I try. I've heard rumors over the years, hikers claiming they saw something on the ridge, hunters finding prints near the old site. A researcher posted photos online of a shelter in a cedar, said it looked man-made, but couldn't explain the size or structure. I looked at the photos. It was the same tree, the same shelter. Part of me wanted to comment, to say I knew what it was, but I didn't. I just closed the browser and went back to work. The secret wasn't mine to share. It belonged to the forest, to the family, to the choice I'd made years ago. I'm retired now, haven't run a saw in 5 years. My back gave out, same as Raymond's, same as every logger who does it long enough. I spend my time fishing, fixing things around the house, taking my grandson hiking on the easy trails. He's 7, same age my son was when I made the choice. He asks a lot of questions, wants to know about everything. One day he asked me if I believed in Bigfoot. I said yes. He asked if I'd ever seen one. I paused, looked at him, and said yes. He got excited, wanted details. I told him I'd tell him when he was older. He pouted, but he let it go. Last month, I drove up to the old site one more time. The road was worse now, washed out in places, barely passable. The staging area was gone, reclaimed completely by the forest. You wouldn't know anything had ever been there. I hiked up to the ridge, slower than I used to, my knees aching with every step. The cedar was still standing, ancient and unmoved. The shelter was gone, collapsed or dismantled, I couldn't tell. But the tree was there. I sat down at the base, rested my back against the trunk, and closed my eyes. I heard the wind move through the branches, heard the distant call of a raven, felt the rough bark against my shoulders, and for a moment, I felt it again, that presence, that watching. I opened my eyes, looked toward the deeper forest. Nothing there, just trees and shadows and light filtering through the canopy. But I knew they were still here, maybe not the same ones. Maybe the cubs had grown and had cubs of their own, Maybe the mother had moved on, left the ridge to a new generation, but the forest held them, protected them, because I'd chosen to let it. I stood, brushed the moss off my jeans, and walked back down. I don't need to go back again. The memory is enough. Bigfoot is real, and that's all I need to know.